Hey everybody, it's Curtis Wright from Curtis Wright Maps here, and I'm excited to share my first video with you today. But before we get into that, I want to pass along my thanks to all of those on the front lines and behind the scenes fighting to stop the spread of the coronavirus. Thank you for your heroic efforts and keep up the good fight. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a relatively new map dealer operating online and by appointment in the Chicago area. A lot of my inventory reflects my interests in the 19th and 20th centuries, and this year in particular, I've been looking at maps of World War II to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the end of that war. Now, today I'm really excited to be able to share with you one of my favorites that I've come across thus far. And I say today, March 26th, because the date is important. It's the 75th anniversary of the end of the Battle of Iwo Jima. And today we're going to be looking at a secret planning map that may have been used in preparation for the invasion of that island. To give just a bit of background information, the island of Iwo Jima sits about 750 miles south of Tokyo and was an important strategic location in the Pacific Theater for a number of different reasons. From the Japanese perspective, Iwo Jima was the host to a radar station that allowed air defenses on the Japanese mainland to prepare for any incoming American bombers. It also had a couple of airfields that would house Japanese squadrons of fighters who could intercept those bombers from the island itself. Now, from an American perspective, it would be beneficial to eliminate these Japanese strategic advantages, and the island could operate as a staging base for the forthcoming planned invasion of the Japanese home islands. But perhaps more than anything, American military leaders thought that the invasion would be relatively easy. In fact, Admiral Chester Nimitz was quoted as saying, "The Japanese will surrender Iwo Jima without a fight." Now, this last point is important because in early 1945, the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps were in the midst of a leapfrogging campaign across the Pacific. Now, this essentially meant that heavily fortified Japanese strongholds in the Pacific would be bypassed for smaller islands that were less fortified. Airfields and supply depots would then be rapidly constructed on these newly acquired territories, and these would then support subsequent operations, as well as be bases for operations that would cut off the Japanese soldiers left behind. Now, the idea that the capture of Iwo Jima would be easy made it an ideal logistical target for the Pacific campaign. However, the Japanese also understood the strategic ramifications of the island, and as we'll see, they certainly prepared accordingly. So here we are in our operational headquarters, and before us is this magnificent strategic planning map for Iwo Jima's invasion. I hope you've got appropriate credentials, because as we can see, the map has been marked secret here on the bottom, with an additional annotation saying that the classification will be changed to restricted once in the combat area. Now, I could talk about this map for days, and the American commanders probably did while discussing strategy, but I was told I should aim to keep videos under 10 minutes, so I'm just going to cover some of the highlights. When looking at this map, the first thing that captured me was the extensive defense symbol key available within the legend. On this, there are over 30 different markings used to label components of Japanese defenses, including communications, supply, fixed weapons, fortifications, and many others. Now, this detailed level of information was made possible by aerial photography taken in October by Navy intelligence aircraft, but the map itself was a combined effort by numerous organizations and units, the complexity of which is alluded to by several notations at the bottom. As we can see, the base map began with the Army Map Service in 1943, and a first round of photography sorties took place in August and September of 1944. In September, the 1633rd Engineer Photo Mapping Platoon used the photos taken the previous month to add contour lines. Intelligence within the Fleet Marine Force and Amphibious Forces then used up-to-date photography in November to compile the overlay of Japanese installations. The map was printed by the 64th Engineering Topographical Battalion, who may have also arranged the complex grid system seen in purple and blue. Fortunately, the legend again has an excellent explanation. The blue grid is organized into 200 square yard blocks, each referenced by a 3-digit number, and is used for area designations. I'm unfamiliar with the nomenclature, but I suspect that means things like naval bombardments or the locations of heavy enemy resistance. The purple grid is more granular, indicating pinpoint designations and referencing numbers along an outer axis. The example given in a legend, point RJ106, is noted as having a pinpoint designation of BC 750-709, as well as A132. Now that our attention has shifted to the interior of the map, we can step back and better understand the scope of the difficulties facing the American invasion force. Defensive installations can be seen on nearly every corner of the island, clearly heavily concentrated along the proposed landing beaches. In addition, probable tank barriers and minefields also await those within their designated beach locations. Rows of trenches and placed machine guns and pillboxes await those who make it off the sand, and that's just the beginning. As imposing as all of these fortifications would have been, it's the invisible system of underground tunnels that would ultimately give American troops the most trouble when capturing the island. We can see a few underground entrances labeled according to the symbols within the key, but that perhaps led to a false sense of security for the Americans. The Japanese defenders ultimately excavated nearly 11 miles of tunnels on an island that's barely 8 square miles in size. These tunnels included fortified bunkers, gun emplacements, troop barracks, and supply depots, basically everything the defenders needed for a prolonged battle of attrition. The naval bombardment preceding the invasion was 10 days long and one of the heaviest during the Pacific War, but it was largely ineffective against troops fortified underground. Now, there was one other significant obstacle to the invasion planning that we can see on this map, and that's the physical makeup of the island itself. In the lower right, a separate legend identifies 6 different types of terrain, with heavy vegetation making up the largest portion of green space within the map. The thick jungle canopy and dense undergrowth would have made moving forward difficult for infantry and provided ample cover for Japanese machine gun nests. Coconut trees are also labeled and were a favorite for Japanese snipers in the interior of the Central Plain. Rocky bluffs and terraces, noted by vertical brown lines, gave the defenders height advantages for line of fire and excellent cover for emplaced artillery and mortars. Now, the contour lines that we see in brown, so helpfully added by the 1633rd Engineering Platoon, also allude to the island's difficult topography. Steep ridges overlook many of the proposed invasion beaches and would have proved difficult to surmount after a beachhead was established. The island's highest point, Mount Suribachi, can be seen in the southwest corner of the map. Japanese artillery embedded within the mountain would rain tremendous fire on the landing forces of both beaches, and it would ultimately prove to be the site of some of the most vicious fighting during the entire battle. It was also on the top of this mountain, on February 23rd, that Joe Rosenthal snapped his famous photograph of 6 Marines raising the Stars and Stripes. Today, I would say this photograph is one of the most iconic images of the Pacific Theater and perhaps of the entire war. This brings me to a different point, and one that I think that's worth ending on. Rosenthal's image really humanizes the war, but the purpose of this map was almost entirely the opposite. As we've seen, hundreds of individuals from multiple different units and organizations worked on synthesizing huge amounts of data to create this map. And when we look at it, we don't really see any human element. That's why I was really excited when this map came along with 2 pieces of related text. One is a 5-page letter dated October 17th to my dearest sis from someone simply named Marion. Now, when we look at the second piece, a list of home addresses of the 3,921st Signal Corps, we find that this was one Marion Flufker of Texas. And I think that it's really important to remember that these were individuals both making maps, defending the island, and undertaking the invasion. So, thank you very much for joining me as we looked at this secret invasion planning map of Iwo Jima 75 years after the island was officially captured. Feel free to check out my website for other blogs and information on World War II maps, and reach out anytime if you've got questions or just want to chat about maps. Thanks and have a great day.